You're listening to the Headless WP podcast, where we discuss all things headless WordPress. The Headless WP podcast is a production of the WP Engine Developer Relations team. If you're interested in more content on headless WordPress, check out developers.wpengine.com for blog posts, tutorials, videos, and more. All right, welcome to the Headless WP podcast. I'm Jeff Everhart, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Fran and we have as our guest, Fred Schott, the co-creator of the Astro framework. So Fred, Fran, how y'all doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
And Jeff, you know how I am. I don't think I'm ever not stoked, but I'm super jam stoked today because just playing with the Astro framework and having Fred on to talk about this and the entire company as a whole, it's such a treat, Fred, and thank you for coming on. And you just enhanced you made my week. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, for sure. And it's only Tuesday of a holiday weekend. This is the first thing.
Yeah. If this is the highlight of the week, that's awesome.
Yeah. And there's so much hype out there for Astro and so much love for it in the JavaScript community that we're definitely seeing some buzz on our side where we work primarily with headless WordPress. So definitely wanted to have you on and talk about it a little bit. As I'm sure we'll talk about it in the podcast or as we go, Fran and I had a chance to play around with it. But to kick us off, we always just like to ask our guests, about their tech origin story. We are suckers for an origin story. So if you wouldn't mind, could you just kind of give us some background on yourself and how you got into tech and then web development?
Oh, God. Yeah. I mean, this Astro could even I'm going to find a way to tie this all together because a lot of what Astro is trying to do is bring and really the joy of PHP. I got started on PHP. I first learned how to do web development, a lot of my development on PHP. And the idea of just mixing your template that you know how to see in the browser with your server logic. So you're making the database call, that flexibility. I wrote some horrible code, but man, I felt productive and I knew what I was doing and just the feedback cycle was so pure on that. We're trying to bring a lot of that back to Astro. So that's how I got my start. There's a total nostalgic vibe in Astro with the mixing of template logic and server logic in the same file. But yeah, I got my start in web development, worked at a couple companies, have worked on a couple of open source projects. So I've been very lucky to work on going all the way back Pika, if anyone remembers that, Snowpack, Skypack. These were all different projects in the JavaScript space, which we're exploring what is now ESM, this module system import-export in the JavaScript language. If anyone's used Vite, Snowpack was very much an early take on what Vite has now become. So
and
they've done a great job of it.
And hype for Vite too.
Yeah, Vite's awesome. We started at the same time, and then Vite just did one of these. And it's oh, okay, they figured it out. They did something right. That project's great. So Astro, we lovingly kind of build on top of Vite, and just have been lucky enough to work in open source and web development for a long time. And Astro is kind of my love letter to web development, and it's definitely a kind of new take on performance, and definitely a kind of response to the big JavaScript, big SPA kind of complexity movement in the last decade. We have a really unique take on web development that's trying to remove a lot of that complexity from the story and go back to something that feels a lot more familiar.
Okay, well, cool. So let's dig into that just a little bit, because I think before we get into the technical details of what makes Astro, we've got maybe some Astro origin story questions. One, I think fantastic name for a framework. So is there anything you want to share with us about how you came up with that name? And then what is Astro's origin story? You just mentioned it being a response to a couple of different things, what were those that as you saw them in the existing JavaScript solutions, and what did you use before you scratched your own itch and made Astro?
Yeah, so I wish I had a better story for the name. It really was, I just went back and found the thread where we were just coming up with goofy names, and Astro literally there's nothing more impressive. It was just does Astro sound good? And then people were yeah. And then that was it. It's the least, it's the most underwhelming story.
No, that's so, but sometimes those are the best names where it's there is no deeper meaning, or just this sounds cool. and we
Sounds
could
cool.
build.
The package is available on NPM. That was
There you
about
go.
it.
Yeah.
Those were
Yeah.
our requirements.
It's funny, Fred, because when I was looking at, sometimes well, maybe as all developers, I just want to, so I'm not like, I'm going to shame myself. I overthink things a lot. Not only in
Well,
coding,
naming things is hard.
And here's the thing is like, I started thinking like, oh, I wonder what Fred's going to say today about the Astro origin story. Oh, is Fred a Jetsons cartoon nerd that he just named it after the dog? That's what I thought the origin story was going to be. But again, overthinking too much. It's just, you just thought.
No.
Yes.
I'm embarrassed by how just like meager that story is.
No, I don't think you should be at all. It is really funny though, because that exists on one end of the spectrum. And then we had, as recent guests, Max Stoiber and Thomas Hanbrock from Stellate, and we talked with them about their renaming, and they were like, well, we were looking through the dictionary and like found this 18th century word to describe star-like structures. And I was like, oh, wow, like that's perfect.
Awesome.
So it's like you have this awesome spectrum of like, all right, no, we just threw it in Slack and everybody gave it a thumbs up. And like, that's the story.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
There's a total tangent, but I just learned through this naming process, actually, the Bluetooth symbol is like an ancient rune for like a
Herald Bluetooth.
Yes, that is got to be the coolest symbol, everything.
Yep.
Are you serious?
I forget. Whoa. Yeah. Go Wikipedia. It's really neat. So, and I forget that might have been like what they named the project internally and like just ran with it. And then, took the rune. I think it's like a layering of 2 runes maybe. So interesting naming stories.
Yeah. So once you hear that story, there's nothing. Who can compete with that?
No, you can't compete with Bluetooth.
Hey,
awesome.
I was just going to add something real quick, Jeff. Who says you don't learn new things on the Headless WordPress podcast? That's number one. Man, that Bluetooth thing blew my mind. And number 2, for your younger listeners out there, the Jetsons was a cartoon in comparison to the Flintstones that Hanna-Barbera wrote, so that it's like a future and a past parody between. Anyway, and Astro was the dog. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh no! So I was just gonna bring us back to Astro's origin story. So you mentioned like this progression of complexity that Astro is kind of a response to. Could you elaborate on that? And like, what did you use before you wrote Astro?
Yeah.
If you had to develop it in a JavaScript framework.
I've been doing web development long, and like I used Next.js. I'm a huge fan of Next.js, even though we are a different framework, but we're very much, we see ourselves as another side of the spectrum. So all the love to that team. PHP in the earlier days. I've used Django, I've used Rails, but a lot of what this project came out of was, so I mentioned a couple of those old projects, and Skypack was one of the earlier ones where we really built a team around building this new kind of CDN. So the best example I can give, if you use like the jQuery CDN ever, this was going to be like that, but for all of NPM, using modern technology,
nice.
And letting you basically kind of deploy your website as just a collection of CDN URLs. It was this whole crazy take on web development that was really cool, but like really limited because we just ended up being this like thing that powered your site without really having any opinion. Like we were just kind of a Webpack plugin at the end of the day. It was kind of hard to really help you do much in sort of like building a better architecture, building a better website. We were just kind of this like little thing that was much smaller than we meant to be. And at the same time, we ended up building a documentation site for one of those projects, and we did 11D, and we got a ton of great feedback on how fast the site performed. Like Alex Russell, if you all know him, he's like performance grandpa of Twitter. Like, like out of nowhere, he DM'd me and be like, "This site's really fast. How'd you do that?" And I was like, "I don't know. We just used 11D. We used this thing that makes JavaScript like kind of a secondary. You can add JavaScript, but you have to do a lot of work yourself. So you end up not really using it that much." And that was something we really connected to. So Astro really came out of actually like, okay, how can we bring that experience where we actually didn't realize we were building a fast site until we built it? Astro is very much like trying to be that for performance, where you only use JavaScript if you need it. And at the same time, reducing a lot of the complexity of, if you've built with Next.js, you have to be thinking of your API and this application. It can run on the client, it can run on the server. It's like, there's just a lot to juggle in your head as you're thinking about your site that Astro is really trying to answer and say, don't worry about that. We're going to be really server first, really server rendered, and you bring in the client side complexity when you need it.
Oh yeah, that's really interesting. And I think like that's something that I feel like the Remix framework talks a little bit about, when I hear Ryan Florence talk about the idea that this can run in the browser and it can run on the server, and like which one is which and where and how is your data getting loaded. Like it's this complexity that the developer has to manage as they go about building their site or app. And it's just like when you take that away and you say, all right, this is going to be server rendered first, like it's just so much simpler. Like it's a much simpler abstraction, right? Because you're not thinking about, okay, what is doing the work here and what is doing the work there. All right, so that's awesome.
And if you really think about the Astro, I was just going to quickly add,
go ahead.
Is where it can tie this all together, because the reason we're talking about it together is Twitter kind of like started saying like, this feels like PHP. Like, why am I writing PHP in like, in an Astro, like because we mainly talk to a JavaScript audience, and they're just feel a little like, what is this idea of like just my server logic runs and then my template runs. And that is kind of the joke of our project, is that we kind of unintentionally rebuilt PHP, or at least that developer experience that I think we all love from PHP, where the dash kind of code fence that we say is essentially just a PHP like server tag, like run this logic and then template out the result. It's meant to invoke that kind of that familiar, easy to use language.
And when you do stuff like that, like I think I heard you mention earlier, like the idea of the feedback loop being very tight with things like that. And that is something I remember from my early days of PHP. Like I could just make a change to a file, refresh the thing, and it was there. Where like once you get into JavaScript land, you're like, all right, well, did I kill this process? Like, did I reload my environment variables? Like there's all these other ways that you can, think that you're refreshing your application and you're not. And it was just,
or even just the hello world of like the JSX React ecosystem is, all right, to start learning web development, you need to learn JSX, React, now, server components and suspense and data fetching, TypeScript, CSS. You're not actually learning CSS, you're learning CSS in JSX, because that's the only way that React, like just to get hello world is so much, versus what we really tried to hit on is like, an Astro component at the end of the day is just a snippet of HTML, and you can add the server logic if you want to, but you can also just copy paste HTML and it'll work in an Astro site. That means script tags, style tags. You can really feel that feedback loop of just, we remove all of the required complexity. You can still add it, but at the end of the day, it's just HTML. If that's all you're trying to learn, all you're trying to work with.
Yeah. And I think having used it, if you want to add it, it's very easy to add. And so like when we did a little team pairing session, what was it, like 2 weeks ago, Fran? Before
it was about 2 weeks ago. I was so stoked on it.
And so I was like, all right, well, let's just, I'm going to follow the docs. Like I'm not a huge React fan. I like Vue a little bit better. So I was like, as I was going through the docs, I was like, okay, let me add Vue. And Fran just like saw my eyes light up. And I was like, oh, wow, this was so easy to implement. And it was just like Astro add, that's there. And then if I have, I get to create these components with the framework that I want and add that interactivity how I want to. It was all super easy to implement.
You should have seen his face, Fred, light up literally in this dual programming. I've been coworkers with Jeff for like 4 or 5 months. I can't believe it's coming on 5 months now. And I've never seen him so happy when we were going through our intro to Astro, and his ability to like literally have the power of like, oh, do I want Vue here? I don't want it here. I'm just going to do my HTML here. And then he's like, oh my God, it's so easy. It's so easy. I didn't even code that much. And I was laughing because I was like, you said, Fred, it's your love letter to web development. I think Jeff was about to like rewrite John Keats's Ode to
I did. I was like, that's it. I'm done. Like my website is getting, it's getting rewritten in Astro. It really is, because I mean, it was that sort of simple thing that I was looking for. And there's a lot of things that I like about how you've positioned the framework that we can get into here in just a second. So like, if you could, just for our listeners who might be new to Astro, could you kind of give us just an overview of its features and maybe describe how it's different from or similar to like some of the other frameworks that they would be used to, like Next.js?
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at there, what you kind of connected with, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that idea of like, number one, we don't ship a front-end framework by default. So unlike Next.js or Nuxt or SvelteKit or Remix, they've all picked a a JavaScript framework, and they like kind of put that all the way down your stack. So you're building your front end, you're building your back end, you're building your server HTML, you're building your data fetching. Like it's all tied to the framework of choice, whichever one that is. We try to take this different stance, which is that all of the kind of like Next.js-y things are actually not tied to your framework. So we do use this thing called an Astro component. Again, it's just really an HTML snippet. But then from there, you can kind of add on your framework of choice. So you can literally inject a React component or a Svelte component or a Vue component, or you can inject all three. Like they all can live on the page in harmony if that's what you want to do. But what that allows us to do is we kind of detach the model from this JavaScript framework component. And instead, we provide the routing, we provide the like data fetching on the server, but it's all going to feel a lot more like a server language like Rails or PHP, or I should say Ruby or PHP or Python if you're using Django. That idea of, at the end of the day, all Astro is doing is rendering your HTML, fetching the data that you need on the server, and then letting you kind of inject the interactive components where you need them. So this is what we call islands architecture, where literally the interactivity on your page, instead of being one big JavaScript app that you need to think about, it's literally these like little islands, almost like you can call them micro front ends, you can call them like isolated components, but they're all able to render and load and become interactive almost in isolation, in parallel. You can control their loading. So if you have something really expensive and heavy, lower down on the page, it won't load until you scroll into view, which is like one of my favorite features of Astro. It totally just lets you detach from thinking about your website as a big JavaScript application. And instead, it's a page and it's going to have some interactivity, but you don't have to worry about that complexity until you need it.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome, because I think one of the things that initially drew me to Vue was the idea that when it sort of busted onto the scene, it was built as like the progressive framework, right? I didn't have to like do the create React app thing in the terminal to get anything usable. I could include this script tag on my existing website and add these little like, almost islands of interactivity where I wanted them. And it's just like, so I like that feeling with Vue, because like I didn't like having to be tied to all this command line stuff. Like I didn't need these long build processes for to do things like a carousel component, or like maybe like a header that toggles a class name on like a drop down menu or something like that. So it certainly felt to me like that same philosophy was baked into Astro, which I really liked. I think the idea too that you've sort of relegated the JavaScript framework to like rendering HTML, which I think is like what it was initially billed as, right? Like I remember React, it was like it was a user interface library. This is to render HTML. Like you really nailed it. And like, that's what this does. But if you want to add in some of those like client directives, you can get really specific in telling it how to load, your bundles to make stuff a little bit interactive. And I think, what did we do, Fran? Like I made like a basic component that was like just static HTML. And then I made like the, counter increment.
Oh, you did a counter. Yeah, you did a counter.
Yeah. And it was just like, that was super easy. And then we looked at, how do we load this when it's visible? Do we load it when the browser state is idle? Like there's a lot of options there to use that. So the islands architecture stuff is really cool.
It's pretty dope, man. Because like over the weekend when I played with it in React, I don't know why I like React. I'm a glutton for punishment. But my mama always says, you always do things and like things the hard way, Fran. I guess I'll never learn my lesson in life. But anyway, that's another React tangent.
I'm not trying to shame anybody who likes React.
I'm not shaming.
It's fine to like React.
Hey, it's the most popular web framework out there right now.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
Going after the king.
So I think, I'm like the person who doesn't know what they're doing over here using Vue.
But what was cool is I didn't really have to npm, and I didn't have to import anything. I literally just said like install React, right? And then I made a component in a folder, did a button component with JSX, and then I input it in the islands architecture. Like I could put my component in the HTML, and I just made a button that said hello world with a JavaScript pop up on click. And I was like, oh my God. And then I added that I just used a fetch API and added my WordPress endpoint. I was like, oh my God, that it looks ugly, but the data's coming out. I was like, geez, that was pretty simple.
It's so awesome to hear you all. It's so awesome to hear you all connect with this, because this is literally like the early pitch was like, use your favorite framework. And we weren't sure, like, is everyone just going to build their full site with React? Because we could let you do that. Literally, like, only use React components to build your site. Even if they're server rendered, you could do that. No JavaScript on the front end. But what we realized is that people actually like the Astro syntax, because if you think about what it is, it's a UI component that was designed for the server only. And all the complexity of React and Svelte and Vue comes from having to handle user interactivity. Like, that's ultimately what they're designed for, is the idea of like, okay, React, it's going to re-render when some state changes, or Vue is going to, like or Svelte's a good example, like export const, like I need to export this thing and handle what happens when one of my props change. Like, all these things are about changing state over time, which is totally a front end concern, but not really on the server. You're kind of rendering the page once, shooting it over the wall to the user, and then you wash your hands of it. So, like, we talked a little bit, I think, before we started recording about like CSS, or the idea of like, how do you handle CSS in React? Like, that's because React was designed around a set of limitations, and Astro was designed around just like, how can we get the HTML, the CSS, the scripts, if you need them, to the user. So the amount of complexity we have to deal with is 10% of what all these other frameworks were designed for. What we found is people actually seem to be moving to that syntax first, and then they go to their framework when they need the interactivity, but they're actually able to leave a lot of that baggage behind if they're having trouble doing styles in React, or learning how the export keyword works in Svelte. Like, Astro is a much simpler take, because our limitations, our requirements, what we're concerned about, way limited compared to what the front end has to worry about.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting. That brings me to kind of one of the points that I really like about how you've positioned the framework. So I think in a section of like the Astro docs where it's like when to use, or like when should you use this, you talk about this being built for like content focused websites and not so much web applications. And I think that's really unique, because like you don't see a lot of technologies do that and be like, hey, if you're building this thing, like, don't use us. And so much the tendency is like, you have a framework that starts off small, and then it like grows and grows and tries to be everything to all people, and just eventually does a bunch of things really poorly. And I'm not like pointing fingers at anybody saying that, but I just think that's like that's the growth cycle, right? It's like these things get large, and then people have more needs, more niche needs, and it gets bolted on. And then eventually you're like, what is all this stuff and what is it doing? And so like, I really like the idea that you've said, this is what we're for. And if you're like looking at this, maybe you look elsewhere. And so I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and this is where like, I think we're way less competitive with it. Like, something about like the front end frameworks, like it feels like this holy war of like, everyone choose your side and stick with it, and now all other frameworks are dead to you. We really believe that Astro kind of fills this void that no one else is looking at right now, which is that content focused site. So, and it's why we don't see us as like a competitor, or a like Next.js as the kind of other side of the spectrum. And I think SvelteKit and Nuxt all kind of fit this. Like, if you're building an application where you have dashboards and state and what happens when the user does this thing, like if you're building the next Facebook, Next.js is a great choice. Like, it handles all that for you. The idea of thinking of your site as a JavaScript application, it's worth the cost of shipping all the JavaScript, because you get this really nice developer experience where data is flowing everywhere and you're re-rendering the site every time. Like, that's really good for an application. The cost is the complexity, and also the performance is you're shipping all that JavaScript down to the user just to make the whole thing interactive. That's a huge cost for something that cares about first page load. So marketing site, a blog, e-commerce, like anything where SEO becomes an issue, because Google is going to downrank you if you take too long to load, which is a huge problem if everything has to be JavaScript. So that's where Astro really comes in. It's a totally different set of concerns that content site has, where performance matters more than the data flow of an entire site, when really the site just exists to get some content in front of you, like a blog post, a marketing site, or a product. E-commerce, they want you to hit that buy button as quickly as possible. That's very different than the next Facebook. So we get to kind of come in, and our architecture is very unique, and it's really uniquely suited to that developer.
And that's Fred, awesome, because I feel like, oh, go ahead, Fran.
No, I was just saying that, like, as you were speaking, Fred, my mind was just, well, obviously my mind's blown already just having you on the show talking about Astro and the island's architecture, man. But it's so cool, dude. But the other thing is that approach is that, like, you just gave me an idea for a future blog post in my own on my own stack here at WP Engine, but the differentiation of what you actually are trying to do at the core of your website or web app, if you will, as Fred was saying, a Facebook versus, hey, I just have a call to action site because I got a product that a SaaS thing that I want to sell or whatever. That's a huge disparity. And people that are getting into web development, even like some senior developers, with all this confusion of all the frameworks flowing around in the ecosystem, it's kudos to you, Fred, and the Astro team to actually state your purpose. State your purpose. And
it's hard to do. You don't want to, you never want to say no to anyone, right? You'd like,
that is
it's
true.
Hard to say this is for you and probably not the best choice for you, but I think it's kind of the place we find, like, we made these trade-offs intentionally. So it's not like we're trying to come up with a fake message to like patch over our deficiencies.
No.
Like, there's so much work happening on the complexity side of things. We really just, it's a unique take on this from an architecture standpoint to a message to a kind of where our themes and templates all lie. Like, we're all about serving this developer, especially with the headless CMS movement. Like,
yes,
people are using headless CMSs to build sites, but like, why are all the front-end frameworks for building apps? Like, that's where we see ourselves today.
Yeah.
Like, Gatsby kind of came in and tried to look at this, and I think they've kind of, obviously been taking a step back to focus on some more kind of core problems. But with that kind of them taking a step back, that's like everyone's been moving to Next.js, and that's overkill. And like, where do they find themselves? Like, this feels like the right time to have this conversation about a new architecture designed for this use case.
And I'll just say one thing about that is that the beauty of this space that we're in is that progressively the web's just going to continue on, right? It's not going anywhere. I should have invested it in the 90s. What did I do?
In the 90s, what, pets.com?
Yeah. My mom was like reflecting back. She's like, damn, Fran, that internet thing stuck around. Anyway, but the cool part about this whole thing is, Fred, to your point, is that the right tool for the right job is okay, because as far as from an industry perspective, there is plenty out there for all either website content focus versus application dynamic client-side Facebook style applications. And that's what's the beauty, is that with these kind of frameworks and movements within our ecosystem, it just makes our industry that much better. And then it makes people want to get into it more. And then it continues a kind of like a circle of life Simba thing, you know, anyway, but,
totally. Yeah. It's a big web.
Definitely not a zero-sum game, I think.
No, it's not.
Which is, nice to see everybody kind of realize that and say, just because I like this thing doesn't mean I'm devaluing this other thing.
Doesn't mean.
I don't know. I see that is something that we've. It's just like, I just wanted to add, like, it's weird seeing this new crop of. There's a couple other new frameworks like Solid.js, Quick, even 11D is kind of trying to tell a story here. It's like, and I think because we have this new mindset of like different frameworks, different choices, use what you like. Like, we're tweeting at each other and like having a lot more fun with it. Like, all the holy war mentality just feels like it's this relic of like, you have to pick a camp, and now all the new frameworks are like, no, do whatever you want, it's cool. It's been really fun to see, like, just, I don't know, everyone seems to be having a bit more fun with it these days.
And I think that's also like baked into there, right? Like, because you're saying do you want to use web components, or you want to use Vue? Like, you can do that. Like, come one, come all. Like, it's the definition of a big tent framework, which is really cool. And I see a lot of utility for that, particularly with the types of developers that we support at WP Engine, right?
Yeah.
People doing headless WordPress. In most cases, like, I can point to a couple of people who built like apps or SaaS-like things on top of headless WordPress, because you can do it. But most things are that content-focused site. Like, they're just looking for speed, performance, in some cases security. So I feel like having something there that just doubles down on all that just sort of underscores that, like, the space is here, like, it's staying here, and it's really cool to see.
Nice.
I do have one other like technical like question that I wouldn't mind just getting your thoughts on. So like, I really like the idea of, like shipping as little JavaScript to the browser as we can, and like these low JavaScript runtimes, where I know Astro sort of builds itself that way. I've done some exploratory work with Remix. Like they're also sort of geared towards the idea that this should work by default without JavaScript. So like, what do you see being the drivers of that movement?
Oh God, there's a lot there. The biggest one that it seems like everything is flowing out of is Google has kind of taken a stance on performance. Yeah. 5 years ago, you could have just ignored performance. You really could have, and you would have been punished for it in your like data. Like there's plenty of data backing up that every 100 milliseconds you cause your user to spend waiting. That is actual measurable churn, bounce, someone not converting, someone not buying that product. Like you weren't being rewarded for not having a fast site, but you were being punished, but in kind of an invisible way. And the biggest change I'd say that's happened is Google has started really pushing the message that no, you're being punished for building a slow site. Like we're going to downrank you on SEO. We are going to make it really clear with all these great Lighthouse, Web Vitals. These are still fairly new tools that have like totally taken over how we talk about your site. Like we can tell a performance story, and on that alone, people are excited about what we're building. So I'd say that's been the biggest, like Google stepping in and putting their hand on the scale in defense of these kind of things, which are really like people are building Create React app, like e-commerce sites, like those are just slow. It's like there's no server rendering, like the pain of it. That was because people didn't really know, they didn't think about it in these terms. And Google, I think, deserves a lot of credit for getting these kind of Web Vitals, these core terms out there into the world and putting some real stakes in the game that are very visible. Like no one wants to be downranked on SEO. That's such a clear thing versus performance. Maybe we're going to ignore this and hope it goes away. Like you can't ignore the fact that you're dropping out because you're being beat out by a much faster site in those same rankings. Yeah, that's a big one. I'd say there's maybe like just a larger industry trend, which is, and I think Next.js is kind of the other side of this. Like if you look at what React is doing with React Server Components, super cool technology. They're trying to solve the idea of shipping less JavaScript with more JavaScript. Like it's a solution that's built into the framework. It's going to add runtime cost. It's super cool. It's super powerful, but it's just more incremental complexity and more JavaScript to run this thing. Where you hope it's going to work. I really like. I haven't seen as many kind of actual performance metrics coming out of it. I'm sure they'll do a great job, but it's one of those things where we see ourselves. I think what's fun about the Astro project is it's very much a reset. It's it's VHSs versus DVDs. Like you can keep building better and better VHS players, but like, what if we just revisited this from the get-go and revisited? The answer isn't more complexity. The answer is actually reimagining where the UI framework sits in the stack. It doesn't have to be the end-all be-all. It can be a tool that does its job, like everything else, which is to render interactive UI. That's, I'd say, the larger industry trend that we think that like that's the why now. That's kind of really exciting for us.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting. It's going to benefit a lot of users too. I mean, when you just think about like you said, once Google puts their thumb on something, stuff happens because there's dollars attached to it. And so, I'd be happier if every website loaded in 100 milliseconds or less like that. That's a fantastic world to envision in my brain.
And Next.js deserves a lot of credit because they give you a lot of tools. And I think where we see ourselves is this reset is like, what if it was fast by default? Like instead of you needing to hire someone who's an expert in performance, what if just like the framework stopped you from, death by 1,000 paper cuts or death from one big paper cut? Like what if we could see ourselves as actually responsible for performance instead of saying, no, that's your job. We're just the framework. You figure out performance. Like, no, we see it as our responsibility.
That's something I talk about in comparison to WordPress a lot as well, because it's about that like philosophical positioning of where are we going to prioritize these optimizations? Where it's like with WordPress, right? You can make fast traditional WordPress sites, but I have to make all these intentional choices where like, Next.js does some of that for you out of the box, but it's cool to have other options out there that are like, and I think on Astro's thing is right. It should be impossible to build a slow website with Astro, which I think is like a whole nother level of like, we're going to just, not encourage or not allow you to do these things that are maybe common practice, but bloat a page and,
Oh, I mean, if you want to build a slow site, we won't stop you, but you have to, yeah, that's the line we draw.
But it should be impossible.
Yeah,
it's going to be hard.
Unintentionally, it should be impossible. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wait, so because one of the questions, and you addressed this, Fred, earlier about, and that's kind of a learning thing for me because, for me, origin story wise, is I learned in JavaScript and I kind of like PHP was secondary. In fact, Jason Ball here still has to be my co-pilot who invented WP GraphQL when we're coding together and writing PHP. But I just kind of wonder, number one, from a comparability perspective, I need to see these. You guys need to point these out to me, the dev memes of comparing Astro to PHP. Are they is it talking smack or is it good memes? Yeah. On the secondary thought that I just had, and you can add on to it, Fred, is I think that's a good approach because as far as having that templating system of, okay, we're going to server render these things, and then you can choose on the front how to render these things from a template perspective. I think layout wise, that totally makes sense for a content driven site. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's where I think the memes come from. Ultimately, it's the simplicity of, here's your server logic, here's your template. And the idea of our actual syntax isn't the PHP tag and the dash that we use. They feel very similar. I've done some wild stuff with PHP where you're literally making a database call and then you're mapping over the rows that come back and the HTML then gets added. We do have some rules in place. You aren't mixing and matching. You're very much up here is the server logic and down here is the template. But the idea is that it has something that feels familiar to everyone. So that learning curve is something we really care about. And all of this stuff we've been talking about is almost directly in service of Astro should be really easy to learn, either as someone learning web development for the first time, you're just going to worry about HTML. Or if you're coming from React, Svelte, Vue, PHP, we tried to have something in there for everyone that was going to be this anchor. So the Astro component, it's a single file component, kind of like Svelte or Vue, and it uses this almost JSX if you need to work with data, you can kind of map over an array of items like JSX. Yeah. So it's got all these little things where it's this is your hook in if you need to feel familiar. And the PHP one is probably my favorite because it's just it's simple like PHP. That's the meme. The meme is that it's all this complexity kind of melts away. You're just literally call the database inside your component. You don't have to worry about this loader function or this code might run on the client, so you can't call the database directly because who knows where it'll run. That all melts away. Make a fetch call, make a database call, whatever you want to do. The end goal of the Astro component is to render HTML on the server. That's at the end of the day what it's doing.
Man, Fred, I know you're a busy guy, but man, that'd be cool. It might be against company policy, but adding Fred to our WP admin, Jeff, and then us three co-writing a blog post tutorial. Headless WordPress in Astro.
Oh yeah,
I'm down. Set it up.
That could be cool. Yeah, let's do that. Maybe we do a live stream or something. We can definitely
live stream so many. Real quick.
I mentioned this to you all earlier, but also you will not be the first because the first person to ever do a headless WordPress demo was Chris Coyer. Literally rewrote CSS tricks in Astro, talking to WordPress using a fetch call and just iterating over the data. That was one of the first ever demos, and that was when we were oh shit, this is here. This all fits together well.
Fred, is that on YouTube somewhere I could watch?
It's on GitHub. I don't know if he ever streamed it.
Oh, dude!
But then he left CSS tricks, and he sold CSS tricks. So I don't think he's our guy anymore.
That'd be sick.
We need a whole new intro.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, Fran. I think there's a lot of nostalgia too, as somebody who was doing PHP stuff 10 years ago because it was so simple. It was just a file, you edited the file and then you clicked refresh in the browser. There wasn't a bunch of other stuff you had to do. It was just that easy. And that's to me where the meme comes in. And I also think it's funny because as somebody who's been around and done PHP stuff for a while, it's gotten a bad rap. PHP has its fair amount of haters. And so I feel you're either on team hate PHP, or you're looking at Taylor Otwell's Lambo and you're right. PHP land, you're in one side or the other. And I'm on team think fondly of PHP because it is still very easy to develop in. And
it's funny because I've been on these Twitter, not wars, but and even I have meetups here in Austin, Texas in JavaScript versus, and they get heated like it's almost like a cult. I'm like, bro, it's a programming language. They're both fine. Why do you hate it on PHP so much? These hardcore JavaScript guys, they're like, Fran, you're messing around with WordPress even headlessly. Yeah, your career is going nowhere. I'm like, I'm on DevRel at WPH. I don't know what to do.
Just show him Taylor Otwell's Lambo, man.
Yeah. Sean Wang, I don't know if any of you all follow him on Twitter, but like he will always be the first one to just be like, y'all are fighting over like high school, middle school drama. And like, meanwhile, people are doing real work over here. Like, figure out your JavaScript, like little tips, and then come and like do some real work over here with us. I mean,
just make the thing.
You just have to like look at the scoreboard, right? Like WordPress is still 40% of the web, like 60+% of content driven sites, like, or CMS driven sites rather. Like I don't know why people don't give WordPress more credit for that. Like everyone's trying to reinvent it, but then like can't come to terms with the fact that it's still this giant force, coming up on 20 years later?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, you have to. I feel like if there's anything that Astro is, it's like, it's a recognition of that fact and trying to now take the best parts of WordPress and bring them into this modern Jamstack JavaScript world, because you can't ignore it. It's a huge powerhouse. No. There's clearly something going right there.
Jeff and I have said this many times, Fred, that like this is not a negative connotation at all, the word cockroach, but PHP is the cockroach of the internet. If there was a zombie apocalypse, you can smash PHP, you can spray raid on it, it's not going to die. You can nuke
it. Exactly.
This thing won't die, guys. It's here to stay anyway. So
so awesome. So we'll switch gears just a little bit. So I know like you have Astro, the open source framework. It also looks like there's an Astro technology company that exists alongside the framework. So what's the roadmap look like for y'all at Astro, I guess, company wise, and how are those two things symbiotic?
Yeah, so we formed a company January of this year, which is mainly to support the project. So we saw that this was starting to catch on. We realized we needed full-time development on it. We do have a pretty, I'd say, active open source sponsorship model. So we have Netlify, which we're super lucky to have as a sponsor. Storyblock just came on, Vercel, Google. Like we've done a really good job of building out the open source side of things, but at the end of the day, we still haven't hit like one person working full time on this. And to kind of play in this space now, the bar has been raised. It can't be a side project. So a lot of the company we saw is kind of creating the team that would support this project full time, invest in it, docs, code, the whole deal. We very much see ourselves as in support of the open source project. So I'd say trying to flip the model a bit in terms of building things that make Astro users, help them make their lives better. So I'd say Tailwind is a really good inspiration for what we're trying to do here. Like Tailwind UI, they're making millions of dollars on that, like just on components alone. Like there's clearly ways to build a company around your open source project that aren't taking advantage of that company, of that user base, which I think it's a hard line to walk, but we're really trying to be conscious of that. So
yeah, definitely.
Our roadmap is supporting the project, supporting our users, not building a hosting company. Like that is not the direction we're trying to go here. We think there's enough room here to just kind of support the users we have with stuff more like components, themes, how people are using Astro. And we're super excited about that.
That's a cool.
Because it's just interesting to see how all the different takes on how companies decide to do that sort of thing. So obviously, like WordPress, where we sort of understand. Like we have WordPress associated products and like commit some amount back to core development and things like that. But you look at some of the CMSs, like I always get this one messed up. It's not Strappy.
Contentful Graph CMS.
No, one of the open source ones, and I can never remember which one. I don't know, but you got like things like Ghost CMS. Like they're sort of open source, but have their own like hosting company built on top of it. So it's really unique to see how people approach that. It's cool to hear that y'all are going to track what the Tailwind folks are doing, because I think that's a really neat pattern too. And they produce a lot of value for a lot of people for not a ton of money either,
it's an odd time for open source, because I think we're a part of this. So like it's like a reckoning of what is our role in this. Like you have Rich Harris joining Vercel and Zach Leatherman joining Netlify. Clearly there's like big companies investing in open source. So that's one road you can go, or you can build a company, but then like you need to make sure those incentives are aligned. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for failure and to take advantage of your user base if you're not careful. So it feels like there needs to be some third path, but it can't be sponsorship, I don't think, because it's just your I don't know. I can think of 2 or 3 projects, Vue and Babel, that have done this well, but even Babel with its size, I mean, they still, I think most recently were just like, this isn't sustainable. Like, all of the people who are working so hard on this are taking pay cuts to make it happen. Like, at the end of the day, there needs to be some third path here, and I don't know what that is.
Man, I'll tell you what, Fred, you're a cool guy.
I hope you can find it. Yeah.
Yeah. If I win the lotto, man, I'm a new sponsor.
No, we have sponsors. No. We have sponsors. Like, there's so many projects that don't. We try to get back to our dependencies when we can, just because we're so user facing. We have, a great story that we can tell with Netlify about pushing our users to check out Netlify, and it's a sponsorship. There's it's like wearing Nikes to play basketball. Like, there's a contract there a bit, but it still allows us to do some really cool things. We just did literally yesterday or on Friday of last week, a giveaway. Like, every couple months we give our full sponsorship budget back to the contributors in our community. So it's totally peer nominated.
Man. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Every couple months it gets bigger and bigger. So it was just $5,000 given back to people working on docs, people working on the Vercel integration, just the people who are making this community awesome. So it's cool. We do get to, in little ways, play around with the things that we want to see happen in open source, and actually using your budget for the community is a big part of that.
Yeah. Because what I fear, like most of, and this is something like where I'm kind of a little bit newer on the business side of things, Fred, is that there's been podcasts I listened to where, like, if an open source project, obviously it's open source, so if it's not properly funded or whatnot, that maintainer has a day job and has to pay bills. It gets abandoned. It was a cool open source project, but no one's working on it because they can't afford to. You know what I'm saying? It's that kind of like, at the end of the day, you have to make some kind of money. And that's why I'm like always trying to connect, like, okay, how can they sustain this? How can they keep that the thing? That's the thing, man.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I know it's
hard.
The, like, companies hiring you to work on the project seems to be a trend that gives someone full time, but it also, it's that same incentives question that you just got to watch out for. Like, are you incentivizing to work on behalf of the company or on behalf of the framework?
Yeah, that's 100%.
And that does become a hard line to toe.
I mean, credit to Zach and Rich both. I think they've done a good job of, and actually, was it Ryan Carniato of Solid? Like, I've talked with all of them, and I think they all were like, okay, I'll join you, but like, this project isn't a Netlify project or a Vercel project. Like, this is a project. You are sponsoring open source development. So it's possible. I think they've done a good job so far.
Man, that's cool.
Well, cool. So we're pushing the top of the hour. We definitely want to be respectful of your time. I think we got like two more quick questions that we'll hit you with. So in your experience, have you seen, obviously you mentioned the Chris Coyer thing, and so that's a pretty big example of people using headless WordPress with Astro, but is there anything else that you've seen out there in the wild?
Yeah.
And any thoughts on how we as people who are working on headless WordPress could make this more appealing to your community?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the term that we love, which is big tent. Like, our whole thing is, and it's, I think, a part of this headless Jamstack world where we find ourselves now, which is like everyone is building assuming that someone's going to consume them using some standard way. So fetch, Fran, you mentioned, like, that's, if that's the API of WordPress, we support fetch, making a GraphQL query, a REST JSON query, whatever that is. We support that pretty much built in using fetch. We have this really cool other system, which you all mentioned, Astro Add. It's like how we have integrations to use your favorite framework, your favorite libraries, tools. Storyblock is a good example. They just released a new integration. So it's literally like Astro Add Storyblock, basically. And it lets you, it hooks up your authentication. It hooks up all the kind of APIs you need. It's essentially like an SDK integrated directly into Astro. And that's something we're really excited about because it lets us we don't have to build every CMS into a single API, kind of like what Gatsby does with GraphQL. Instead, every CMS, every content source can have its own integration that you learn, you have the README, you have the documentation. It's designed for that exact use case. So stuff like that is really exciting. I think with our V1 launch, we're only seeing the early days of what that looks like. If anyone wants to get involved, if we want to pair program on something, I'd say that'd be the best place to start. Like,
I mean, I'm down.
WordPress.
Let's do
Astro
that.
add WP GraphQL.
Exactly.
We found our next project. Because I thought about that. I saw the story block thing and I was like, wow, like, yeah, we should consider.
And it's really, it doesn't even have to be that hard. Like, it's just like best practices. Again, it can use Fetch internally. So you have all the tools there. It's just building in best practices, making people feel like they're on the well-trodden path. That's a big thing that we see our integrations as serving. Very
cool. Awesome. Fran, you want to wrap us up with our fun question?
Yeah. Before I ask the Fran fun question at the end, I just think Fred, after the podcast, let's sync again. I mean, we can communicate by email, but that would be cool. Like future-wise, maybe some kind of live stream between the three of us where we literally take a GraphQL and WordPress endpoint and then just consume it. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It's just like an entry, like, look how easy Astro is kind of thing. Yeah. I think that'd be dope. I think that'd be super cool. Yeah.
I know Ben on our team has actually been like, he live streams every Thursday. If you all want to come on that,
he does?
That would be a built-in audience.
Okay. That'd be fantastic.
Oh, heck yeah.
I'll connect you guys. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
And his videos are hilarious.
Hilarious.
Totally. Oh yeah, he's a character.
Oh man. Okay, so Fred, I know that you can't just sit in front of a computer and talk Astro all day. I mean, you're a human being. So for fun, to decompress, because there's diminishing returns in code. If you're sitting there and you're banging your head, you need to step away. What do you like to do to decompress? Are you a rock climber? Do you mountain bike? Do you just throw more JavaScript at stuff? What do you do?
I mean, it's a weird part of coding as a job, where it started as a hobby and now it's a job, and it all gets jumbled together. I had a daughter last year, so I have a 16-month-old daughter, and that's awesome. A big part of what I do when I'm not working. There's plenty of that's enough work to keep you busy for a lifetime.
That's it. Enough said.
That ends up being my hobby these days.
Got 2 kids under 7, and I'm right there with you. I'm just like,
exactly.
Fran's like, oh, I did all this cool stuff on the weekend, and I'm like, what weekend?
What weekend?
or we went,
weekends are sacred.
Played soccer or something. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome, Fred. Yeah, I think
developers.
That's like a full-time hobby / job on the side in itself, being a parent, especially. Yeah. So I totally get that. Man, I definitely, I'm pretty selfish. I don't think I could man, I'm never going to be a dad or a husband.
I mean, I think we're coming out of the worst part of it, which is, like a newborn. Like now we got a toddler. I think I've heard, I don't know, Jeff, you can tell me, I've heard it gets easier.
In some ways, and in some ways it just gets more complicated.
That's not reassuring at all.
Yeah, no, you get more mobile and more fun. And so I definitely love watching my kids grow. But I can't carry them around in a bassinet thing anymore, which was nice. But they sleep. So there's just trade-offs all around. But
that'd be cool to make Astro baby swag, like baby Astro rattlers and a jumper. Anyway,
I'm pushing us to have one career, just wild out there, swag, like the flamethrower of Elon Musk. What's the Astro flamethrower? That's baby rocket onesie packs. Might be the thing.
Baby rocket packs.
Baby rocket packs. Exactly.
I say that knowing that no parent's going to put their baby in a rocket pack.
Yeah, Jeff Delaney from Fireship.io, who's awesome, by the way, did 100 seconds of what Astro. I'm sure you've seen the video. It's pretty awesome. But anyway,
Oh, well, awesome, Fred. Thanks for coming on today. So we can wrap it up. But definitely, thanks for coming on, Astro. I'm pumped about it. So if you're listening as an audience member, you're going to see me doing more stuff with it, both personally and professionally. Yeah, for sure.
Likewise.
And then, Fred, I think we would be really excited about any kind of future collaborations or anything around content we could do.
Totally.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
So, is there anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I was going to say some links. Astro.build is our homepage. If you could star the GitHub repo, we're trying to get to 20K stars. That's our next goal. So every star counts. Okay. Always appreciate that. And Astro.build/chat is our Discord server. So come join, give a wave, say hi, say you came from the podcast. We do a lot of our collaboration on Discord, so it's a great, really fun community.
And I just popped in there this morning, so I'm excited to poke around and meet some new Astro heads. I don't know, astronauts. What do you call yourselves? There you
go. So embarrassing. We don't actually have a name. I think astronauts, just because it's so obvious.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes we say the Astros, like the baseball team. It's Astros. We haven't figured.
There's so many you can. Oh man, this was awesome, man.
Yeah, it was. Thanks so much, Fred, for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yep.
All right. Cheers, Fred. We'll talk soon.
Take it easy. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Headless WP podcast. If you liked today's episode, go ahead and give us a share or a like on whatever platform you're listening on. And be sure to keep in touch with the WP Engine Developer Relations team on Twitter, Discord, or through our website. Thanks for listening.